You are nothing without my name on your back." Michael Carter ripped divorce papers from his briefcase and slammed them onto the table so hard the dishes rattled off the edge and crashed to the floor. He seized Emily's hand, forced the pen between her fingers, and pressed her palm flat against the signature line. His face was 6 inches from hers. "Sign it. You have 60 seconds or my lawyers make this very ugly for you." Emily's hand did not shake. She signed. What Michael Carter would never recover from was the truth he signed away with her, a trillion-dollar empire he never once thought to look for. If this story moved something in you, subscribe to our channel and follow every part until the very end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Emily Reed had been awake since 4:30 that morning. Not because she had somewhere to be, or because the baby they never had needed feeding, or because work demanded it. She was awake because she had learned, somewhere in the long, quiet middle of her marriage, that sleep was a privilege that came with a certain kind of peace, and peace had been leaving their house in small increments for years. Like water draining from a cracked basin, slow enough that you kept hoping the crack would seal itself. Fast enough that one morning you noticed basin was nearly empty. She stood at the kitchen counter and measured coffee grounds with the kind of muscle memory that belongs to routines as they stop requiring thought. 6 years of making coffee in this kitchen, 6 years of the same mugs, the same corner where the morning light came through at an angle and made everything look more beautiful than it actually was. She used to love that light. She used to stand in it on purpose. She heard Michael's footsteps before she heard Michael. She always did. He moved through their house like a man in a hurry to leave it, his pace brisk and deliberate, the kind of walk that communicated without words. I have places to be, I have people to see, I have a life that exists outside these walls that matters more than what is inside them. She poured water into the machine and pressed the button. She did not turn around. Emily, his voice was different. She noticed that immediately. It was the voice he used in boardrooms, not unkind, exactly, but stripped of the soft edges that intimacy is supposed to carve into a person over time. Clinical. Prepared, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment. She turned. He was dressed already, which surprised her. 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, and he was wearing the charcoal suit she had once told him made him look like he could run the world. He'd smiled at her when she said that. She'd meant it as a compliment, and he'd received it as a promise. He was holding a manila envelope. Not flowers, not coffee, not the soft, awkward look of a man about to say something he wasn't sure how to say. He was holding a manila envelope, and his jaw was set, and his eyes were doing the thing they did when he'd already made a decision, and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to it. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him, and she understood with the particular, quiet devastation of someone who's been bracing for a blow for so long that finally receiving it is almost a relief. Exactly what was happening. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." Something moved across his face. Not quite guilt. More like the faint inconvenience of encountering resistance where he'd expected none. He set the envelope on the counter between them and slid it toward her with 2 fingers. The way you'd push a contract across a table in a negotiation, businesslike, efficient, final. "I had my attorney draw these up last week," he said. "I need you to sign them today." Emily did not move toward the envelope. She stood with her back against the opposite counter, her hands wrapped around a mug that had not yet been filled, and she looked at her husband, this man she had chosen, this man she had followed to Chicago from a world he did not know existed, this man she had loved quietly and honestly and without condition, and she breathed. "Today," she said. "I have a meeting at 10. I'd like this handled before then." There it was. The word that did more damage than he would ever understand. Handled. Like she was an item on a calendar. Like 7 years of a life together was a logistical inconvenience to be processed before a business meeting. "Michael." She set the empty mug down. "Is there something you'd like to say to me?" "Something beyond hand me the pen. I think the papers say everything that needs to be said." "Papers," she repeated, and the word came out so soft it barely made a sound. "You want 7 years explained by papers," he exhaled, not rudely, but with the impatience of a man who had anticipated this being cleaner. "Emily, we've been drifting apart for a long time. You know that. I think we've both known that, have we?" "Yes." She looked at him and he looked back, and there was a moment, just a moment, barely long enough to measure, where she saw something flicker in his eyes that might have been grief, or might have been the last of something that had been burning down for years. Then it was gone. "There's someone else," she said. It wasn't a question. His jaw tightened. That was answer enough. "Her name isn't important," he said. "No," Emily agreed quietly. "I suppose it isn't." She looked at the envelope for a long moment. Her fingers were steady when she reached for it. Her face, which she had trained over years and years, trained out of necessity, trained because some circumstances in life demand you learn to hold yourself together with both hands and show nothing, gave away nothing. She slid the papers from the envelope. She found the flagged signature line. She looked at her husband one last time. "Do you have a pen?" she asked. He blinked. He'd expected tears, maybe. Arguments, certainly. He hadn't expected this perfect quiet composure, this absolute stillness. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a pen without a word. She signed. She slid the papers back across the counter. And then she said the thing. She said the 7 words that he would hear, without wanting to, for a very long time afterward. "You'll understand what you lost when it's too late." He picked up the envelope. He straightened his jacket. He said, "I'll have my attorney reach out about the settlement." And he walked out of the kitchen, and then out of the house, and she heard his car back out of the driveway with the practiced ease of a man who had practiced his exit and found it satisfying. The coffee machine beeped. Emily stood in the kitchen, in the morning light she used to love, in the house that now felt like a word in a language she was no longer learning, and she breathed, and then she picked up the empty mug, filled it with coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table alone. She allowed herself exactly 12 minutes. In those 12 minutes, she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened, not the betrayal of another woman, not the insult of the paperwork, not the cruelty of handled, but the deeper, older grief of having been seen so completely wrong by the person whose whole job, whose whole gift in a marriage is supposed to be seeing you correctly. He thought she was ordinary. He had always thought she was ordinary. And she had allowed it, she had chosen it, had cultivated it, had spent 7 years in this city, in this house, being the woman who cooked and listened and asked careful questions and folded herself down to fit into the life Michael Carter was building for himself. Because the one thing she had been most afraid of in all her life was never being loved for who she was. Only for what she carried. She had come to Chicago 7 years ago with one mission: not to find a husband, though she had not been opposed to it. Not to build a life from scratch, though she'd had to do that too. She'd come because she was 26 years old, and the only life she'd ever known had been constructed around a name, a fortune, and a family legacy so large it functioned less like a history and more like a gravitational field, pulling everything toward it, determining what was possible and who was real and which rooms you were allowed to stand in. She had wanted to be real. Her grandmother, Evelyn Sterling, had understood this better than anyone. Evelyn was 81 years old and had spent 60 of those years building something that most people couldn't fully comprehend: a private financial empire that moved through the global economy, like weather moves through atmosphere, invisibly, inevitably, reshaping and that touched without announcing itself. Sterling Global Holdings, 8 industries, 47 countries. And at the center of it, a woman with white hair and eyes like winter light who had understood, from the time Emily's was 7 years old, and asking questions that most adults didn't think to ask, that her granddaughter was the one. "You can have all of this," Evelyn had told her, when Emily was 25 and the succession question was no longer theoretical. "But you need to understand what you're carrying first. Not the money, not the name, what it costs, what it costs." Emily had left Chicago, had left the only city she truly loved, with its brutal winters and magnificent lake and the particular quality of its ambition, which was hungrier and more honest than New York's, and gone to build her ordinary life. Her real test, her controlled experiment in being loved. She had met Michael at a gallery opening she almost didn't attend. He was 31, energetic, funny in the way that Chicago men can be funny, dry and self-aware and not trying too hard. He was building a tech company with 2 partners and a conviction that he was going to change how small businesses managed their finances. She had liked that conviction. She had liked his hands and his laugh and the way he'd asked her, that first night, not what she did for work, but what she cared about most. She'd told him she cared about people making it. He'd smiled like that was the best answer he'd ever gotten. She'd thought, maybe this one. For the first 2 years, she'd thought that often. He had listened to her, then really listened, the way that people do in the beginning when everything about the other person still has that particular shine of mystery. He asked about her family and she gave him careful half-truths. Grandmother in New England, old money, nothing too interesting. He seemed to accept that without much curiosity. She had noted the lack of curiosity but told herself it was simply his way. She had been so determined to make it real that she had perhaps made the mistake of not noticing what was already there. Not the worst of him, the ordinary parts, the way his listening gradually became hearing. The way his questions became shorter and then stopped coming. The way his ambition, which she had loved initially, which she had thought was a quality like courage, began to crowd everything else out. Room by room, until the house of their life together had very few rooms left, and she was in all of them alone. She had watched it happen. She had tried quietly, in the way she did everything to redirect it. She'd asked about his employees by name, and he'd answer with numbers. She'd bring up a decision he'd made that struck her as cutting a corner, and he'd assure her she didn't fully understand the pressures. She'd try to talk about them, about their life, their future, what they wanted, and he'd look at her with the politely restless expression of a man listening to a radio station he'd already grown tired of. She'd known for at least a year before the papers appeared that this was ending. But knowing something is ending and having it end are two completely different forms of pain. The 12 minutes were up. Emily finished her coffee, rinsed the mug, and set it in the dish rack. She walked to the small home office she'd kept at the back of the house, the room Michael had occasionally asked about, and she had always described simply as where she reads. She sat at the desk, opened her laptop, and found the number she had not dialed in 2 years. It rang twice, Miss Emily. Daniel Brooks's voice was exactly as she remembered it, measured, warm with the particular quality of loyalty that had been tested and refined over decades of service. He had been her grandmother's head of private affairs for 31 years. He was the only person outside the family who knew her complete story. "I was wondering when you'd call, were you?" she said. "Your grandmother said 6 months ago it was coming. I told her I thought she was being pessimistic." A pause. "She told me to schedule the car for this week." Despite everything, despite the morning she had just lived through, the hollow thud of signed papers, the 12 minutes of grief she'd allotted herself, Emily almost smiled. "She was never pessimistic in her life," Emily said. "No, ma'am, I believe the word she used was precise." Daniel, she looked at the window, at the ordinary street outside, at the city that had been her chosen home for 7 years, and was now something she'd have to renegotiate her relationship with. "I need to come home. The plane will be ready tomorrow morning. I need 48 hours here first." "Of course. And Daniel, I'll need to know everything that's been happening with the holdings that I've been." She stopped. "With the things I've been keeping at a distance, I'll have it prepared. All of it." His voice shifted slightly, the warmth remained, but something else came through, something careful. "There are some things you should know, Miss Emily. About some of what's been happening in Chicago." She went very still. "Chicago," she said, "yes. Related to several people in the mid-market technology and financial services sector." He paused. "People you may know." She closed her eyes. She thought of Michael in his charcoal suit, the one that made him look like he could run the world. She thought of the phrase she had heard him use more and more in the last year, on his phone calls, the ones he took in the other room, the ones that got shorter and clipped when she walked past. The consolidation move, the secondary leverage play, the growth acceleration model. She'd never told him what those phrases meant to someone who had grown up speaking that language. She'd never told him she recognized all of it. "Tell me," she said. "Not over the phone, but Miss Emily, there are employees at risk. Small investors, business owners who have contracted services. If the decisions being made in the next 30 days proceed as currently planned." "How many people?" A pause. "Hundreds, possibly into the thousands, depending on the cascade." She opened her eyes. The morning light was still coming through the window at its angle, still making the ordinary world look more beautiful than it was. She looked at it for a moment longer than she needed to. "I'll be there in 48 hours, she said. "In the meantime, I need you to quietly begin an assessment, full picture. I want to understand the scope before I make any moves." "Understood." And Daniel, she stopped, and when she spoke again, her voice was completely level. Calm. The voice of someone who had spent 26 years in one life and 7 years in another, and who was now standing at the exact point where both lives were about to become one. "Don't let anyone know I'm coming, as you wish, Miss Emily." She hung up the phone. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the house that was no longer entirely hers. She thought about the woman she had been this morning, standing in the kitchen light with an empty mug, letting herself be handed papers by a man who had never once, in 7 years, thought to wonder what she was not saying. She thought about the 12 minutes of grief she had allotted herself and whether they had been enough. Then she stood up, straightened her spine, the straightening that happened instinctively now, the one that belonged to her other life, the life she had been putting down and would now have to pick back up, and she began to pack. She took only what she had brought, which by design was very little. She'd arrived in Chicago 7 years ago with 2 suitcases, a head full of determination, and a secret so large that keeping it had required the kind of sustained, deliberate discipline most people never have to practice. She was leaving with the same 2 suitcases, a head full of clarity she had not expected grief to deliver, and a decision forming that was not yet fully articulate, but was moving in her the way weather moves before it arrives, felt before it's visible. She was not going to destroy Michael Carter. She had considered it for exactly 30 seconds. She was honest enough with herself to admit that the 30 seconds had existed. She was also honest enough to admit that the fantasy walking into his world on her own terms, revealing in one devastating moment exactly what he had so carelessly discarded, was satisfying in the way that fantasies are satisfying. Completely and temporarily. Then she'd thought about the employees. She'd thought about the small business owner who'd taken out a second mortgage to afford Carter Financial Solutions' enterprise package. She'd thought about the junior analyst who'd turned down a job at a larger firm because Michael had promised her equity and growth. She'd thought about the hundreds of clients who'd staked real money on the idea that this company was exactly what it presented itself as. Trustworthy, careful, built for the long term. None of those people had signed divorce papers. None of those people deserved to carry the weight of Michael Carter's choices. She zipped the second suitcase. She thought of what her grandmother had told her once, sitting across from her in the study of the Sterling estate with winter light on the windows, and the quiet that comes from having more power than you'll ever need to spend. The measure of who you are is not what you do with what people have given you. It is what you do with what they have cost you. This is what it costs. She carried her bags to the door. She did not look back at the kitchen, or the morning light, or the mug she had rinsed and left in the dish rack. She walked out of the house, called a car, and began. 48 hours later, she was gone from Chicago. But she was not done with it. In the weeks that followed, in the offices of Sterling Global Holdings in New York and Boston, and the quiet room in the Connecticut estate where her grandmother sat with her eyes sharp and her hands folded, and her particular expression of someone who has been proven right and takes no pleasure in it, Emily worked. She worked the way she had been taught to work, methodically, without emotion that couldn't be harnessed, with the kind of focused attention to detail that her grandmother had spent decades modeling for her. She studied Michael's company the way a surgeon studies a body before operating, looking for what was damaged and what was still viable, mapping the difference between what needed to be excised and what could be saved. Carter Financial Solutions had started strong. She could see that clearly, and she gave credit where it was honest to give it. Michael had built something real. The original platform was genuinely good, the kind of practical innovation that solved an actual problem for actual people. The early clients had been right to trust it. The early employees had been right to believe in it. Then the money had come, the second round of funding, the strategic partnership conversations, the larger clients with larger demands and larger implicit promises. And something had shifted, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in the slow and quiet way that things shift when a person's idea of success grows faster than their idea of responsibility. The decisions of the last 18 months told a story she recognized. Over-leverage, accelerated expansion into markets the company didn't have the infrastructure to serve properly. Customer contracts that promise capabilities the platform couldn't yet consistently deliver. And underneath all of it, buried in reporting structures that required patience to untangle, a pattern of middle management raising concerns that kept getting filtered out before they reached anyone with the authority to act on them. The employees knew. That was always the thing about employees. They knew before the press releases, before the quarterly reports, before the founders admitted it to themselves. They knew because they were the ones doing the daily work of trying to make the promises true. And they knew exactly how wide the gap was between what was promised and what was possible. Emily read the internal communications that her team's careful, quiet research had assembled. She read the emails from some senior engineer named James Wu, who had escalated the same infrastructure concern 4 times over 8 months and received, each time, a response that amounted to "We hear you and we're working on it." She read the notes from a client success manager named Rosa Delgado, who had spent 3 months trying to find a solution for a small business client who'd been sold a capability that didn't exist yet and whose renewal was coming up in 6 weeks. She read all of it, and then she sat with it, with the weight of it, with the specific sorrow of watching something that could have been good become something that was going to hurt people, and she thought about what it meant to have a choice. She had the resources to end Carter Financial Solutions in 30 days. Not dramatically, not with a press release or a public confrontation. Just quietly, methodically, The way things end when the right entity decides they should end. She could call in a specific debt from a specific creditor, trigger a covenant in a specific partnership agreement, and let the cascade do what cascades do. She did not do that. Instead, she called her attorney not the Sterling family's principal legal team, but a specific colleague she trusted completely, and she said, "I need to protect some people without the company knowing it's me." What she arranged in the following 2 weeks was invisible. It was intended to be invisible. She restructured a vendor relationship here, ensured a specific contract guarantee there, quietly positioned things so that if the worst happened in the next 6 months, the people most exposed, the employees, the small clients, the ones who hadn't had the options that Michael Carter had always had, would have a floor beneath them. She did not tell Michael any of this. He did not know she was watching. He did not know that the woman who had signed his papers at a kitchen counter at 7 in the morning and handed him back his pen with a steady hand was now the person standing between his company's most exposable and a very bad outcome. He did not know because he had looked at her for 7 years and seen ordinary, and the mistake of that conclusion was still quietly doing its work, but there was something else happening too, something she had not entirely anticipated. She found herself in the long hours of careful analysis, not only looking at what Michael's company had become, but at who Michael had been before it got there, the original business plan. The first employee handbook written at the beginning, which had an entire section about company culture, that read. She read it twice to make sure she wasn't projecting with a genuine belief that the people in the company were its most important asset. The early client letters, which were personal, which apologized when something went wrong, which offered specific remedies instead of vague reassurances. She'd known that version of him. She'd loved that version of him. She was not naive enough to confuse the earlier version with the current one, or to mistake understanding for exoneration. But she found herself thinking about what had happened in the space between the first employee handbook and the fourth investor presentation, what had been lost in that distance, and whether any of it was recoverable. She thought about that a great deal. Her grandmother watched her think. Evelyn Sterling had the quality, rare and very powerful people, of knowing when to wait. She had watched her granddaughter arrive at the estate 2 weeks earlier with 2 suitcases, and the particular expression of someone who has been through something that cost them what they could afford to lose, and she had made her tea and told her nothing she didn't already know, and she had waited. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after Emily's return, they sat together after dinner in the study with a fire that Evelyn kept burning from October through March, regardless of the weather's opinion on the matter. Emily was reading through a document summary. Her grandmother was not pretending to read anything. She was simply watching. "Ask your question," Emily said, without looking up. "You know my question. You want to know what I'm planning to do about him. I want to know what you're planning to do about all of it," Evelyn said. "The company is a specific problem with a specific shape. What I want to understand is the larger thing." Emily set the document down. She looked at the fire. "I protected the people who needed protecting," she said. "Yes, that part is done, or it will be in 2 more weeks. After that, the exposure is manageable regardless of what happens with the company." "And the company?" Emily was quiet for a moment. "There is going to be a moment," she finally said, "where he sees the full picture, not from me, not yet, but from circumstances. The quarter is going to close and the numbers are going to tell a story that his current team is not equipped to hear. And when that happens, he is going to be standing at a choice. What kind of choice? The real kind. The kind that tells you who someone actually is." She looked at her grandmother. "I want to see what he does with it." Evelyn studied her for a long moment with those winter-light eyes that had, in Emily's experience, never once missed anything. "And if he makes the wrong choice?" Evelyn asked. Emily picked up the document again. "Then I'll already have protected the people who could protect themselves," she said. "And he'll live with what that cost him." Evelyn was quiet. Then she said, "You didn't stop loving him. It was not a question." Emily did not answer immediately. She read 3 more lines of the document that she was not really reading. "I stopped expecting him to deserve it," she said finally. "That's not the same thing." The fire burned. The study was quiet. Outside the Connecticut estate, winter had closed over the landscape like a hand closing gently over something breakable, and the world was very still, and in the stillness Emily Reed, who was not ordinary, who had never been ordinary, who had chosen for 7 years to be seen as ordinary by the one person whose seeing should have mattered, most sat with her grandmother and her fire and her document and her grief. And she planned. She did not plan with anger. Anger is clean and quick and burns itself out. What Emily carried was something longer burning, something that required more careful management, the thing you feel when someone has failed to understand what they had, and you know what that failure is going to cost, and you have decided, in full clarity, exactly what you are going to do about it. She was not going to let Michael Carter destroy himself. Not because he deserved her protection. Because the version of him that had written that first employee handbook, the one who had looked at her across a gallery opening and asked what she cared about most, that version had not been entirely false. It had been early and untested, and it had not survived the pressure of the years between then and now with anything like integrity. But it had been real, and she was going to find out, in the weeks ahead, whether it was still somewhere inside him, or whether the man in the charcoal suit with the manila envelope had finally finished the job of covering it over. Either way, she would know. Either way, she would act accordingly. And either way, the woman he had handed a pen to at a kitchen counter and watched sign her name with perfect composure and no visible grief that woman was done being invisible. She had 48 hours left before the first quiet moves she'd put in place would begin to surface. She turned back to her document and read on. The settlement check sat on Daniel Brooks's desk for 11 days without being touched. Michael's attorney had sent it over the morning after the papers were filed, a number that most people in Emily's position would have considered generous, the kind of number designed to feel like closure, to feel like a door being shut cleanly from the other side. It was accompanied by a cover letter written in the careful, bloodless language of legal professionals who specialize in making the end of things feel like the beginning of a transaction. Daniel had printed it out, placed it in a manila folder, and set it on the corner of his desk where Emily could see it when she walked in. She walked in, saw it, and sat down across from him without touching it. "He wants it handled quickly," Daniel said. "I know what he wants." Emily looked at the folder. "I'm not signing that." Daniel was quiet for a moment. He had known Emily since she was 9 years old and had brought a caterpillar to Sunday dinner in her coat pocket and defended its presence at the table with complete moral seriousness. He understood her well enough to know that when she said, "I'm not signing that," she did not mean not yet. She meant something more specific, and she meant it completely. "They'll push back," he said. "Let them push." She looked up at him. "I don't want his money." "Daniel, I never did. What I want is for you to tell me everything you started to tell me on the phone. All of it, the Chicago situation." He opened a different folder. What he laid out over the next 2 hours was not a surprise to Emily in its broad shape. She had already assembled most of the picture from her own research, but the specific details landed with a weight she hadn't fully anticipated. Carter Financial Solutions had, in the past 14 months, taken on 43 new enterprise clients. Of those, 31 had been sold service packages that the company's current infrastructure could not consistently deliver. The gap between what was promised and what was actually functional was not catastrophic on any single account, but across 31 accounts, it was the kind of accumulated pressure that a structure could absorb for a certain number of months before it couldn't anymore. "What's the timeline?" Emily asked. "If nothing changes." The first serious failures start showing up in client reporting around month 7. Month 9, some of those clients start talking to their lawyers. By month 12, Daniel paused. "It gets loud. How many employees?" 214 full-time. Another 60 or so contractors. The senior team has some equity. The rest, he shook his head. Standard employment. No unusual protections. Emily thought about James Wu's 4 unanswered escalations. She thought about Rosa Delgado's 6 weeks until her client's renewal. She thought about 214 people who had come to work every morning and done their jobs, and trusted that the person at the top of the structure they'd built their livelihoods inside was doing his job with the same good faith. "And Michael?" she asked. "Does he know the full picture?" Daniel looked at her carefully. "That," he said, "is the question I can't fully answer. The information exists inside the company. Whether it's been presented to him in a form that made its weight clear." He paused. "His chief of staff filters heavily, and Michael has not, from what we can observe, been asking the questions that would force the complete picture to surface. Because he doesn't want to ask," Emily said quietly. "Or because he doesn't know he should, both possibly." In different proportions, Daniel folded his hands. "Miss Emily, what do you want to do?" She sat with that for a moment. Outside the window of the Connecticut Estates East office, the November landscape was doing what November landscapes do, stripping everything down to its essential architecture. The bones of trees visible now that the leaves were gone, the world suddenly showing its actual structure instead of its decorative surface. She thought about what she wanted to do and what she was going to do, and whether those were the same thing. They were not exactly same thing. What she wanted to do involved a boardroom and a revelation, and watching the specific expression cross Michael Carter's when he understood the full geometry of what he had casually discarded on a Tuesday morning while dressed for a meeting. He cared more about than the marriage he was ending. What she was going to do was protect 214 people who had nothing to do with that Tuesday morning and everything to do with what came next. Start with the exposure, she said. I want a structure in place that protects the employees first. Salary continuation, benefits protection if this company goes sideways in the next 12 months. I want the people on the floor to have something under them. That requires positioning Sterling Capital as a quiet creditor. Then position us as a quiet creditor. Daniel wrote something down. And the clients, the small businesses? Those contracts need guarantees they don't currently have. Find a way to get those guarantees in place without anyone at Carter tracing it back to us. That's delicate. I know that's why I'm asking you and not someone else. He almost smiled. And Michael himself. Emily looked at the November trees. Michael, she said slowly, is going to have a moment, a real one, where the company's numbers tell him a story he can't filter out or explain away. I don't know exactly when that moment is come, but it's coming. And I want to be watching when it does. Watching, Daniel repeated. From what distance? Close enough to see what he chooses. She paused. And far enough that the choice is genuinely his. Daniel studied her for a long moment. He had spent 31 years watching Evelyn Sterling make decisions, and he had learned to recognize the particular texture of a decision that had been made not from anger, and not from sentiment, but from the place where clarity lives after both of those have burned through. That was what he was seeing now. I'll begin today, he said. Good, she stood, and Daniel, no one at Carter Financial Solutions can have any reason to suspect Sterling involvement. Not a whisper. Not a pattern that a smart analyst could trace. Understood. Because if Michael finds out I'm behind any of this before I'm ready for him to know, she picked up her coat from the chair. The lesson is lost. And the lesson, she said, with a quiet certainty that had nothing dramatic about it and everything final, is the only thing I actually care about. She walked out. Daniel sat at his desk for a moment after she left, looking at Michael Carter's settlement check in its manila folder. Then he picked up his phone and began making calls. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, Emily worked with the focused, unhurried intensity of someone who understands that the most powerful moves are the ones that are never felt as moves at all. She was in New York 4 days a week and Connecticut for the rest, occasionally on calls with London or Singapore at hours that required coffee she didn't particularly want. She was learning her empire again, not the way she'd learned it as a student of it, watching her grandmother navigate its currents, but as its inheritor, which was a different kind of knowledge. The learning was not always comfortable. Sterling Global Holdings was not a company in the conventional sense. It was more like a weather system, a network of investment relationships, strategic holdings, and private agreements that had been built over 60 years by a woman who understood that the most durable power is the kind that doesn't announce itself. Evelyn had built it to last, which meant she had built it with redundancy and patience and a philosophy of long-term return that was profound out of fashion in the cycle world of modern finance and profoundly effective for exactly that reason. Emily was the rightful heir to all of it. She had been prepared for it, educated for it, specifically shaped by her grandmother's intentional mentorship for 2 decades. She knew the structure, she knew the relationships, she knew the philosophy. What she was still learning was the weight. Not the ethical weight that she had always understood, or at least always been honest about her understanding being incomplete. The physical weight. The way it sat in your body when you were the person people were waiting on. The way a room changed when you walked into it, not as Evelyn Sterling's granddaughter, but as the person Evelyn Sterling had decided, irrevocably and publicly, would carry what she had built. She was in the middle of a Tuesday morning call with the head of Sterling's European division, when her phone lit up with a message from Daniel that read only, Carter, Q3 numbers just dropped internally. You'll want to see the reaction. She finished the call. Then she opened the secure briefing her team had assembled. Michael's Q3 numbers were not a disaster. That was almost the cruelest part. They were the kind of numbers that look fine if you are reading them, the way quarterly numbers are usually read: top-line revenue up, client count up, team head count up. But underneath those surface numbers, if you knew where to look, if you were reading for what wasn't being said rather than what was, the picture was different. Margins compressing, client satisfaction scores that had been quietly reclassified in how they were being reported. a line item in the infrastructure budget that had been deferred 3 quarters in a row, now without explanation. The numbers were telling the truth. The presentation around them was trying very hard to tell a different story. She read the internal memo that Michael had sent to his senior team after seeing the report. It was 4 paragraphs long and managed in those 4 paragraphs to be simultaneously reassuring and dismissive and aspirational without once engaging directly with any of the specific concerns the numbers actually raised. She read it twice, then she forwarded it to Daniel with a single line. He saw it and looked away. Daniel's response came back within the minute. Agreed, but there are 2 people on his senior team who didn't. He attached 2 names. One was the CFO, a woman named Patricia Lang, who had joined Carter Financial Solutions 14 months ago from a mid-size fund and who had, according to the notes Emily's team had assembled, been in 3 private meetings with Michael in the past 6 weeks that had no agenda listed and no minutes recorded. The other was the engineering director, which was James Wu, the same James Wu, who had escalated the same infrastructure concern 4 times over 8 months and been met each time with "We hear you." Emily stared at those 2 names for a while. Patricia Lang and James Wu were doing what good people inside struggling organizations always do. They were staying, and they were pushing, and they were hoping that one more conversation would be the one that landed. They hadn't given up yet, that mattered. She picked up her phone. "I need backgrounders on 2 people at Carter Financial," she told her research team. Patricia Lang, CFO Engineering Director. "I want to know what they've been trying to do internally, and I want to know if there's a way to give them more leverage to do it." The research team delivered within 48 hours. What they found confirmed what Emily had suspected. Both Patricia and James were people who had taken the jobs they'd taken because they believed in what Carter Financial Solutions could be, not just what it currently was. Patricia had turned down a better compensated position to join Michael's company because she thought the platform had genuine potential to become something important for small businesses. James had stayed through the infrastructure problems because he was convinced the core technology was sound and the problems were fixable. They were right on both counts, which made the situation, in Emily's assessment, not hopeless, complicated and with a narrow window, and dependent on someone at the top being willing to finally actually listen, but not hopeless. She made a decision. She was going to help Michael Carter's company from the inside, through people who were already trying to save it, before he destroyed it through a combination of pride, filtered information, and the specific blindness that comes from wanting something to be true badly enough that you stop looking directly at the evidence that it isn't. She was going to do this without him knowing, and she was going to watch what he did when the situation became impossible to avoid. It took another 2 weeks to put the structures in place, the quiet financial backstop that would protect employees and small clients if the worst happened, the slightly quiet advisory relationship that Daniel established with Patricia Lang under a name that had no visible connection to Sterling, the careful injection of additional engineering resources that reached James Wu's team through a channel that looked, to anyone examining it, like a standard vendor partnership. The Tuesday morning that all of those pieces came into alignment, Emily was sitting in her grandmother's study when Evelyn came in with 2 cups of tea, set one in front of her, and sat down in her chair by the fire. "Tell me where things stand," Evelyn said. Emily told her. "All of it, the employee protections, the client guarantees, the advisory channel to Patricia, the engineering support to James." She laid it out with the crisp, organized precision of someone who had spent the past 6 weeks doing nothing else, and when she was done, Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Looking at her tea and the man himself?" Evelyn asked. "He doesn't know any of it." "No, I didn't imagine he did." A pause. "Emily, what does he think is happening with his company right now? He thinks the Q3 numbers were a correction and that Q4 will recover the narrative." She paused. "He's focused on a new partnership conversation that's been approaching them through a third party. A potential strategic investment. He thinks it's going to solve the margin problem." Evelyn looked up. Something shifted in her expression, not surprise. "Exactly, but the particular quality of attention that comes when something confirms a hypothesis you were already holding." "What partnership?" she asked. "A group calling itself Meridian Capital Strategies. They've made informal contact in the last 3 weeks. Expressed interest in a strategic minority stake. The terms being floated are..." Emily paused. "Generous. Unusually generous, given the company's actual position." Evelyn was very still. "Tell me about Meridian Capital Strategies," she said, with a quietness that was not calm so much as the absence of any wasted energy. Emily told her. What she knew about Meridian was limited. They had surfaced recently enough that even Sterling's research capabilities had only assembled a partial picture. They were registered in Delaware, incorporated 18 months ago, with a principal structure that was opaque in the way that structures are opaque when they're designed to be. Their principals were not publicly listed. Their previous investments, such as they were visible, were in a handful of mid-market technology firms that had shared one common characteristic. They had all, within 2 years of Meridian's involvement, restructured in ways that significantly benefited Meridian's position and significantly disadvantaged the original founders. Evelyn listened to all of this without interrupting. When Emily finished, she said, "They are not what they are presenting themselves as. No. They have identified your ex-husband's company as a target, not a partner. That's my assessment. And if he accepts their terms, then within 18 months, Carter Financial Solutions belongs to Meridian in everything but name, and Michael Carter has been managed out of the company he built." Emily looked at her grandmother, along with Patricia Lang, along with James Wu, along with 214 employees, who had nothing to do with any of it. Evelyn set down her tea. "This changes things," she said. "It changes the timeline." Emily was quiet for a moment. "It doesn't change what I'm trying to do." "What are you trying to do?" It was a genuine question, the kind Evelyn asked when she wanted to hear Emily say the thing aloud, not because she didn't know the answer, but because there was something about saying a thing aloud that committed you to it in a way that thinking it did not. Emily looked at the fire. "I'm trying to give him a real choice," she said. "Before someone takes the choice away from him entirely." Evelyn studied her. "You understand that a real choice requires real information," she said. "Yes, and that at some point giving him real information means he finds out who has been standing behind the curtain." "Yes, and you're prepared for that." Emily looked at her grandmother, at the 81-year-old woman who had built a trillion-dollar empire out of the conviction that the most powerful thing in any situation was knowing what other people didn't know you knew. "I'm prepared for that," Emily said. "I've been preparing for it since the morning he handed me the pen." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something Emily had heard from her only a handful of times in her life, in moments when Evelyn had seen something that genuinely surprised her, which was rare enough that Emily had learned to mark each instance. "You are better at this," Evelyn said simply, "than I was at your age." Emily did not respond immediately. "I had a better teacher," she said finally. Evelyn almost smiled. Outside, November had given way to December without much ceremony. The world was cold and bare and honest, the way the world gets when it stops having the option of hiding behind abundance. Emily thought about Michael in Chicago, probably sitting in a glass-walled conference room, looking at Meridian Capital Strategies' term sheet and seeing the solution to his Q3 problem and feeling the specific relief of a man who has been a bit hard truth and has just been offered an easier one. She thought about Patricia Lang, who had probably read the same term sheet and felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. She thought about James Wu, who probably didn't know about the term sheet at all and was still fighting for infrastructure's resources in a company that was circled by something it didn't have the information to identify as dangerous. She stood up. "I need to be in Chicago," she said. Evelyn looked at her. "Not yet," Emily said quickly. "Not openly. But I need someone there I trust who can be close enough to see what happens when Michael meets with Meridian." "You have someone." "Patricia Lang." Emily reached for her phone. "She doesn't know who I am, but she's about to get the most important phone call of her career." "From whom?" Emily thought for a moment. "From a financial consultant named Sarah Ellis," she said, "who has some very specific concerns about Meridian Capital Strategies that Patricia Lang is going to find extremely relevant." She walked out of the study. Already dialing, Daniel answered on the first ring. "I need a clean identity and a credible backstory for a consultation with Patricia Lang at Carter Financial Solutions," Emily said. "Walking fast, investment safety advisory. I want to be meeting with her in person within 5 days. That's very fast, I know." "Meridian is moving faster." She stopped walking. "Daniel, how well do you know Meridian's actual principles?" A pause. A different kind of pause, the kind that meant he knew something he was deciding whether to say. "Daniel, we know one of them," he said carefully. "The silent one, the one whose name doesn't appear in any of the public filings." Emily waited. "His name," Daniel said, "is Warren Cole. He was the architect of 3 hostile restructurings in the late 2000s. He is 73 years old and has been in a quiet operational role for almost a decade." Another pause. "He is also the man who made the first hostile move against Sterling Global Holdings in 2003. The one your grandmother spent 4 years dismantling." The world was very still for a moment. Warren Cole, Emily said. Yes, he's using Michael's company. It appears so. As what? A beachhead, a financial vehicle, we don't know yet. But the interest in Carter Financial Solutions came 6 weeks after Meridian quietly acquired a firm in the adjacent sector that has several overlapping client relationships with Carter. Which suggests this isn't about Michael's company, Emily said quietly. Michael's company is the door to what's behind it. Yes, that's our assessment. She stood in the hallway of the Connecticut estate, phone pressed against her ear with the particular sensation of a situation recalibrating around you. And in real time, the pieces that had seemed like one shape becoming, very rapidly, a different shape. Warren Cole, the man who had spent 18 months trying to dismantle what Evelyn had built 20 years ago. The man her grandmother had defeated, quietly and completely, in a campaign that Evelyn never discussed and that Emily knew about, only because she had found the documentation in the estate's private archive 3 years ago and had spent 2 weeks reading it. The man who was now using Michael Carter, who had no idea who he was married to, or had been married to, or what any of this was connected to, as a piece in a game that had started long before Michael Carter's company existed. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, then she opened them. "Get me everything on Cole you have," she said, "everything. And clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to Chicago." As Sarah Ellis. She thought about Patricia Lang reading a term sheet. She thought about Michael in his glass-walled conference room feeling rescued. She thought about James Wu, still fighting for his infrastructure budget and not knowing that the ground under his company in a direction none of them could see. She thought about Warren Cole, 73 years old, building something in the dark. As Sarah Ellis for now, she said, but not for long. She hung up and stood in the hallway for another moment. Then she took a breath and walked toward her bedroom to pack, and the thing she was carrying, which had been grief when it started, and had been determination for weeks, and was now something larger and more urgent than either, moved through her like weather. Like weather moves before it arrives, felt before it's visible. Already in motion, she landed in Chicago on a Wednesday morning, and the city received her the way it always had, without ceremony, without softness, with the particular blunt honesty of a place that has never once pretended to be anything other than exactly what it is. Daniel had arranged everything with his usual invisible efficiency. The apartment was in River North, clean and anonymous, registered under a name that had no traceable connection to Sterling. The consultant identity, Sarah Ellis, independent investment safety advisor, 12 years in mid-market financial services, had a website, 2 professional references who would answer calls, and a LinkedIn profile that was detailed enough to be credible and sparse enough to avoid scrutiny. Emily had used clean identities before, in contexts her grandmother had engineered as part of her education. She understood how they worked. You didn't become someone else. You simply presented one specific true thing in this case, her genuine expertise in identifying predatory investment structures, and let people's assumptions fill in the rest. Patricia Lang's assistant had confirmed the meeting for Thursday at 10. Emily spent Wednesday reviewing everything her team had assembled on Warren Cole. What she read over 6 hours of careful attention was the portrait of a man who had spent 50 years being underestimated and who had made that underestimation into a weapon. Cole had started in distressed debt in the 1970s and had developed, over decades, a specific methodology that was not illegal in the way that obvious crimes are illegal, but that operated in the territory where the law and ethics diverged most sharply. He identified companies that were healthy enough to have real assets, but vulnerable of to be manipulated companies, whereas the founders' ego-os had outpaced their structural where the internal culture had developed blind spots that a careful external observer could exploit, where the gap between what leadership believed about their situation and what was actually true had grown large enough to be steered. He would offer terms that looked generous. He would position himself as the solution to a problem the founder was already afraid of. And then, over 18 to 24 months, through a sequence of contract provisions and advisory appointments and quiet restructurings, he would own the thing and the founder would be gone, and the employees would discover that the entity they now worked for had very different priorities than the one they'd signed up with. He'd done it 11 times. He had tried once to do it to Sterling Global Holdings. Evelyn had identified him in week 3 and spent the next 4 years systematically removing every piece of leverage he'd tried to establish, not through confrontation but through the patient, invisible rearrangement of the board that surrounded what he was building until the structure he'd constructed had nothing left to stand on, and collapsed violently in a way that the financial press had attributed to market conditions, and that only 3 people alive fully understood. Emily was one of those 3 people. She understood Warren Cole better than he knew. She understood his methodology, his timeline, his tells. She understood what it meant that he had targeted Michael's company, and she was fairly certain she understood why Carter Financial had a client base that overlapped significantly with a sector Cole had been trying to access for years, and its current vulnerability made it an acquisition path that would cost him a fraction of what direct entry would require. Michael was not the point. Michael's company was the door. And behind that door was a sector position that Cole had been trying to buy his way into for the better part of a decade. Michael didn't know any of this. He was sitting somewhere in Chicago right now believing that Meridian Capital Strategies was a growth partner and that his Q4 was about to recover and that the hard part was behind him. She closed the last file. She made herself a coffee she didn't particularly taste, and she stood at the window of the anonymous River North apartment. And she did the thing she always had to do at some point in any situation that involved Michael. She separated what she felt from what she knew, put each of them in its appropriate column, and looked at both columns clearly. What she felt was complicated. She was not going to pretend otherwise. Even internally, watching someone you loved had loved, she corrected herself. Though the tense, felt dishonest walk toward something dangerous while having no idea it was dangerous activated something in her that was older and more instinctive than strategy. She wanted to grab him by the arm and say stop. She wanted to make him understand. She wanted to skip every intermediate step and go straight to the moment where he knew the full truth and had to reckon with it. She did not do any of those things. She put the feeling in its column, acknowledged it, and moved on. What she knew was that Thursday's meeting with Patricia Lang was the first move in a sequence that would either protect Michael Carter from Warren Cole or give her the complete picture she needed to do it more directly. Either outcome was acceptable. Both required this first step. She went to bed at 10 and was asleep by 10:15, which was, she had always thought, one of the more useful skills her grandmother had modeled for her, the ability to sleep before a consequential day as if the consequences had already been managed. They hadn't been, but the night before was not the moment to manage them. Thursday arrived cold and clear. Patricia Lang's office was on the 14th floor of Carter Financial Solutions building in the West Loop, and Emily arrived at 9:55 and sat in the reception area for exactly 8 minutes before Patricia's assistant came to collect her. In those 8 minutes, she observed what she had learned to observe in any company: the texture of how people moved through the space, whether they made eye contact with each other, whether the ambient noise of the floor was the noise of people engaged with their work, or the noise of people performing engagement while privately calculating something else. It was the second kind, not entirely. There were pockets of genuine focus, genuine collaboration, the particular energy of people who still believed in what they were building. But underneath it was the other thing, the sound of an organization that had picked up a vibration it couldn't name yet and was responding to it the way animals respond to pressure changes before a storm, with a restlessness that didn't have an object. She noticed all of this in 8 minutes, filed it, and stood when Patricia Lang's assistant appeared. Patricia was 44, sharp-featured, with the specific bearing of someone who had spent a career in rooms where being underestimated was an occupational hazard and had developed, in response, an economy of movement and expression that gave nothing away cheaply. She shook Emily's hand and assessed her in the same moment, a quick, complete inventory that lasted less than a second and missed very little. Emily recognized the assessment because she did it herself. "Sarah Ellis," Patricia said, "I looked you up. I'd expect nothing less. Your references checked out." One of them was unusually complimentary. "He's unusually difficult to impress," Emily said. "He means it." Patricia almost smiled. "Sit down," they say. And for the first 4 minutes they circled each other, in the way that two careful people circle, when neither is yet prepared to say the thing they actually came to say. Patricia asked about Emily's background. She answered her with the true things, the parts of her genuine expertise that fit the Sarah Ellis frame, and Patricia listened with the focused, skeptical attention of someone who was deciding whether to trust. Then Patricia said, "You said on the phone you had concerns called Meridian Capital Strategies." "I do." "Specific concerns or general caution?" "Both." "Specific ones first." Emily set a single folder on the table between them. I've been tracking Meridian's activity for about 8 months. They have a pattern of approaching mid-market technology companies in periods of margin compression, with terms that are structured to look like strategic partnerships but function over an 18 to 24-month horizon, like quiet acquisitions. Patricia did not reach for the folder immediately. She looked at Emily. Go on, the mechanism is elegant. The initial terms are genuinely attractive liquidity when liquidity is tight, advisory expertise that actually delivers in the short term, enough genuine value in the first 6 months to establish credibility. Then the contract provisions that seemed minor in the initial negotiation begin to be exercised. Board advisory seats become operational influences. Reporting requirements create information asymmetries. And by the time the original leadership understands what's happened, the equity structure has been modified enough that their options are very limited. Patricia was completely still. You're describing what happens after a term sheet is signed, she said carefully. I'm describing what happens when a specific term sheet is signed, Emily said. The one Meridian presented to Carter Financial Solutions 12 days ago. The stillness became a different kind of stillness. How do you know about that term sheet? Patricia asked. Her voice was level. The question was not hostile, but it had an edge. Because the 3 firms Meridian approached before Carter had advisors who knew me. 2 of them called me when the term sheet arrived. One of them signed anyway. Emily paused. He doesn't run his company anymore. Patricia looked at the folder. She reached for it. She opened it. What was inside was 8 months of Emily's team's work, compressed into 22 pages. Meridian's pattern of engagement, the timeline of each previous target, the specific contract provisions that had functioned as the mechanism of control in each case, and a legal analysis of the Carter term sheet that Emily had commissioned under Sarah Ellis's name from an attorney who had no idea who was actually paying for it. Patricia read. She read fast, with the focused intensity of someone who is recognizing things they have already half understood, finding the language for instincts they have been carrying without being able to articulate them. Her expression changed 3 times while she read, and she controlled all 3 changes with represses, but not quite perfectly. On page 14, she stopped. She looked up. The board advisory provision, she said. In section 7, yes. I flagged that provision to Michael. Her voice was very controlled now. I told him it needed to be restructured before we could consider signing. He told me the Meridian team had explained it as standard language. It is not standard language, no. Patricia closed the folder. No, it isn't. She looked at Emily for a long moment. What do you want from this meeting, Ms. Ellis? I want the people in this company to make an informed decision, Emily said. Whatever that decision turns out to be, and if Michael decides to sign anyway. Emily held her gaze. Then he will have signed with full knowledge of what he's signing. Which is different from what's happening now. Patricia absorbed this. She looked at the folder again, then back at Emily. You came here for Michael, she said suddenly. It was not quite a question. Emily did not react. I came here because Meridian is dangerous. This company has employees who deserve better than to become collateral in a quiet acquisition. That's true, Patricia said. And it's also not the complete answer. She leaned forward slightly. I've been CFO here for 14 months. I know this company's financials better than anyone. And I know that someone put protective structures in place around our employee benefits and our small client contracts about 6 weeks ago. Structures that our legal team couldn't fully trace. Structures that have no logical explanation unless someone outside this company decided to protect the people inside it. She paused. That someone wasn't you. The structures predate your contact with me. But you know who it was. The room was very quiet. Emily had known this moment was a possibility. Patricia Lang was exactly as good as her file suggested. What I know, Emily said carefully, is that the people in this company deserve to have someone fighting for them. Whoever that someone is. Patricia studied her for another long moment. All right, she said finally. All right. She stood up. I'm going to share this folder with Michael this afternoon. I'm going to ask for a meeting, and I'm going to put this in front of him and tell him that signing that term sheet would be the worst decision he has ever made. She picked up the folder. And then we'll see what he's made of. Yes, Emily said quietly. We will. She walked out of Patricia's office, took the elevator down, and was in the back of a car heading north within 4 minutes. She texted Daniel, meeting done. Patricia has the information. Watch for Michael's reaction this afternoon. Then she sat with her phone in her lap and the city moving past the window, and she thought about Patricia's last sentence. We'll see what he's made of. She had said it without particular emotional investment, the way you say a thing about a professional situation. Emily had heard it differently. She had been wondering the same thing for weeks. What he was made of. Not in the abstract, not in the general sense of character she had known his character, or thought she had for 7 years, but in the specific sense, what was left of the man who had written the first employee handbook, who had asked her across a gallery opening what she cared about most and meant it genuinely, who had built something real before the money came and changed what real meant to him. Was any of that still there? Or had the years of filtered information and short-term pressure and the particular corrosion of surrounds yourself with people who told you what you wanted to hear, had all of that finally completed the job of covering it over? She didn't know. She was about to find out. At 2:17 in the afternoon, Daniel sent her a message. Patricia requested the meeting. Michael agreed. At 43, another message. Meeting ran long, can't read the outcome from external. Waiting at 5:21, he asked Patricia to leave the folder with him. Meeting ended without a decision. He told her he needed time to review. Emily stared at that last message for a while. He needed time to review. That could mean almost anything. It could mean he was genuinely reading it. It could mean he was calling Meridian to ask them about it. It could mean he was sitting at his desk looking at 22 pages of information that was dismantling the narrative he'd been living inside and trying to decide whether to believe it. She needed more. She called Daniel. I need to know if he contacts Meridian tonight, she said. We can't monitor his private communications without I know what we can and can't do. I'm asking if there's a legitimate way to know. A pause. Patricia, if she has any contact with him after hours, she might be willing to relay. Ask her. She hung up. She paced the apartment. She made coffee she didn't drink. She sat at the table with her laptop and tried to read a briefing document for the European Division call. She had at 9 tomorrow morning and read the same paragraph 4 times without retaining a word. At 7:44 her phone rang. Not Daniel, Patricia Lang. Emily answered. He called them, Patricia said. No preamble. Her voice was tight. He called Meridian at 6:15. I don't know what was said, but he called them. Emily closed her eyes. How do you know? Because his assistant called mine at 6:45 to reschedule tomorrow's internal leadership meeting, which he only does when he's processing something he doesn't want to bring to the team yet. A pause. He's not going to share the folder with the leadership team. He's going to try to handle this privately, which means he's still considering signing, or he's trying to get Meridian to explain away what's in it. Patricia's voice had the flat, exhausted quality of someone who has been fighting the same battle from inside a structure that keeps resisting the fight. Miss Ellis, I've been trying to make him see the real picture of this company for 6 months. I have stayed in this job. I have turned down 2 other offers to stay in this job because I believed this company could be what it was supposed to be. But I cannot make him see something he doesn't want to see. No, Emily said. You can't, so what do we do? Emily stood at the window again. The city was dark and lit, the way Chicago is at night, the particular combination of cold and electricity that makes it look from above like something alive and purposeful. She thought about Warren Cole, 73 years old, somewhere in this city tonight, watching his mechanism work. She thought about Michael at his desk with 22 pages in front of him, calling the people who were trying to trap him to ask them if they were trying to trap him. She thought about James Wu, who had escalated the same concern 4 times and had no idea that the ground under his company was about to shift in a direction that would make infrastructure budgets irrelevant. She thought about the gala. The annual Chicago Business Leadership Gala was 3 weeks away. Every significant player in Chicago's business world attended. It was the kind of event that functioned as a social operating system for an entire sector where relationships were confirmed or renegotiated, where the positioning of companies in relation to each other became visible in physical space, where who walked in with whom and who acknowledged whom in public said things that no press release could say. She had been invited, as she was every year as Emily Reed, estranged granddaughter of Evelyn Sterling, which was a fiction the social circuit had been working with for 7 years, long enough that no one questioned it anymore. She had declined every year, also as Emily Reed, because Emily Reed was keeping a low profile by choice. She was not Emily Reed this year. She was going to have to do something she had been planning in the abstract and had not yet made concrete. She was going to have to arrive as herself, not Sarah Ellis. Not the quiet wife who had been managed out of Michael Carter's life with a pen and a manila envelope. Not the woman who had spent 7 years being seen as ordinary by everyone in this city except Daniel Brooks. As Emily Sterling Reed, granddaughter and designated successor of Evelyn Sterling, heir to Sterling Global Holdings, and the woman who currently controlled more capital than every person in that gala room combined. The thought of it moved through her with a complexity she didn't try to simplify. There was something that was not quite fear, and not quite anticipation, the feeling of a door you have been standing outside for a very long time, knowing that once you open it, the world rearranges itself around you permanently, and everything you were before the door is still true, but is no longer the most visible thing about you. She had been preparing for this door her entire life. She hadn't known when she left Chicago with 2 suitcases that this specific version of it would require Michael Carter as its context. She hadn't known that the 7 years she'd spent here would end the way they had, and that the ending would be the thing that finally made the door necessary rather than optional. But here she was, and there it was, Miss Ellis, Patricia said, and Emily realized she'd been silent for nearly 20 seconds. "I'm here." She turned from the window top. "I need you to do something for me." "What?" "I need you to buy 3 weeks. Whatever that requires, delay the Meridian conversation. Request additional due diligence time, whatever legitimate mechanism you have available as CFO to slow the process without shutting it down." 3 weeks, Patricia repeated. I can probably do that. With the Q4 close coming, I can make a case for needing the full financial picture before we can responsibly commit to external partnership terms. Is it? That gives us maybe 22, 23 days. That's enough. Enough for what? Emily thought about the gala. She thought about 214 employees. She thought about Warren Cole and his 11 Privy Hesseks, and the one time, 20 years ago, when he'd met something he couldn't move through. Enough for Michael to see the complete picture, she said. All of it, including the parts he doesn't know to look for yet. Silence on the other end. Then Patricia said quietly, "Who are you?" Actually, Emily had anticipated the question. She had prepared an answer that was technically accurate and strategically incomplete. But she stood at the window of the anonymous River North apartment looking at Chicago, her city, the city she had chosen and lived in and loved for 7 years, while being someone other than who she was, and she found that the prepared answer wouldn't come. "I'm someone who should have been honest about certain things a long time ago," she said, "and who is trying to make sure that other people don't have to pay for the cost of that." Another silence. "Okay," Patricia said finally. "Okay, I'll buy the 3 weeks. Thank you." Miss Ellis, whatever you're planning for the end of those 3 weeks, a pause. "Make it count, I intend to." She hung up. She stood for a moment longer. Then she picked up her phone and called a different number, not Daniel. Not her legal team, not anyone connected to Sarah Ellis or the protective structures or the Cole investigation. She called her grandmother. Evelyn answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting the call. "It's time," Emily said. "I know, I'm coming out. 3 weeks. Pause. That was not uncertainty. Emily, it's not due uncertainty, see, but something more like the pause of a person allowing a moment its full weight before responding to it. Your grandfather, Evelyn said, attended that gala every year for 30 years. He used to say it was the one room in Chicago where you could see exactly who everyone actually was, if you knew how to look. I know. He would have liked seeing you walk into it. Emily's throat tightened unexpectedly. She managed it. He would have found something to criticize about my shoes. Evelyn made a sound that was as close to laughing as she generally got. Probably. A pause. "Emily, are you ready?" Emily looked at the city. She thought about a Tuesday morning and a kitchen counter, and a pen pressed into her palm by a man who thought he was handling the last obstacle between himself and the life he deserved. She thought about the 12 minutes of grief she had allotted herself and then set aside, not because the grief was finished, but because it was hers to carry privately and not publicly, and she had always known the difference. She thought about what it had cost, all of it, and what her grandmother had said, the measure of who you are is what you do with what people have cost you. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." She hung up. She set the phone on the table. She sat down and opened the briefing document for the European Division call, and this time, when she read the first paragraph, she retained every word. She worked until midnight. She slept at midnight. She was up at 6. In the 3 weeks that followed, she was Sarah Ellis in the mornings and herself in the afternoons, and always underneath both, the person she had spent her entire life becoming, the one her grandmother had built her to be, the one the last 7 years had tested her into being, the one that Michael Carter had looked at across 1,000 ordinary mornings and failed entirely to see. On the 4th day, Daniel reported that Meridian had pushed back on Patricia's due diligence delay but had ultimately accepted it, which confirmed what Emily already suspected. Cole wanted this deal, and he wanted it cleanly, without the kind of resistance that might attract scrutiny. A messy contested acquisition was not his methodology. He needed Carter Financial Solutions to come willingly. On the 9th day, James Wu sent a company-wide email about a new engineering initiative that Emily recognized immediately as the product of the resources her team had quietly channeled to his department. She read the email 3 times. It was the email of a man who had been fighting for something with inadequate tools and had just been handed better ones and didn't yet know where they'd come from. It was specific and practical and full of the energy of someone who had not given up. She forwarded it to Daniel with a note, "Keep the support going. He's going to need it for what's coming." On the 15th day, Michael Carter did something she had not anticipated. He called Patricia into his office and told her he wanted to do an internal audit. A real one. Not the kind that was designed to confirm what leadership already believed, but the kind that started with the assumption that the numbers might be telling a story that the narrative around them was not fully reflecting, and that worked from there. Patricia had called Emily the moment the meeting ended, her voice carrying something Emily had not heard in it before. "Surprise, he asked for a real audit," Patricia said. His words, "I want to know what's actually true." Emily sat very still. "I want to know what's actually true," she repeated. Yes. She thought about the man who had written the first employee handbook. She thought about him asking her across a gallery opening what she cared about most. "All right," she said, "give him what he asked for. Everything. Don't filter it, don't manage it. Give him the full picture and let him sit with it. That picture is not comfortable." "No," Emily said. "It isn't, that's the point." On the 19th day, the complete audit results went to Michael. Emily knew because Patricia texted her a single word at 2 in the afternoon. Delivered. She did not hear from Patricia again that day, or the next. On the evening of the 21st day, the night before the gala, her phone rang at 9:47. "Patricia, he's not signing the Meridian term sheet," Patricia said. Emily exhaled slowly. "He called me into his office at 8 tonight," Patricia continued. "He had the audit results in the folder that Sarah Ellis gave me, and he had them laid out side by side, and he looked at me, and he said," she stopped. "He said, I've been asking the wrong questions for a year. Tell me where we actually are." The city outside the window was exactly as it had always been. Cold, lit, honest. "What did you tell him?" Emily asked. "I told him the truth. All of it, including that I've been in contact with an outside advisor who had concerns about Meridian, and that the advisor gave me information I should have brought to him weeks ago." A pause. "He asked who the advisor was." Emily waited. "I told him I'd need to ask permission before sharing that," Patricia said. He said another pause, and something in Patricia's voice shifted. Something Emily couldn't quite read. He said it was a fair answer. He said he'd been asking people to protect him from uncomfortable information for too long, and he wasn't going to keep doing that. Emily sat with that for a long moment. "Ms. Ellis," Patricia said, "tomorrow night, the gala. Is that when he finds out?" Emily looked at the clothes hanging on the back of the closet door. Not Sarah Ellis's clothes. The dress Daniel had arranged to be delivered 2 days ago, the kind of dress that walked into a room and made the room understand immediately that its assumptions needed revision. "Yes," Emily said, "tomorrow night." She hung up. She stood at the window one last time. She thought about everything that was about to change for Michael. For the company. For the 214 people who had kept showing up every morning. For Warren Cole and his carefully constructed mechanism that was about to encounter the one thing it had no answer for. She thought about walking through a door. She had been standing outside it long enough. Tomorrow, the morning of the gala, Emily woke at 5:45 without an alarm. She lay still for a moment in the dark of the River North apartment, listening to the city breathe the low, constant presence of Chicago at this hour, trucks and distant trains, and the particular quality of urban silence that is not actually silence at all, but of organized noise that the ear learns to read as quiet. She had missed the specific texture of this city at this hour. She had missed it without fully admitting it to herself in Connecticut, the way you miss something that is tangled up with pain, and so you leave the missing unexamined because examining it would require examining everything around it too. She got up, she made coffee. She stood at the window with the mug in both hands, and she looked at Chicago, and she let herself, for the first time in weeks, simply be in it without an agenda attached to the being. 20 minutes, that was all she allowed. Then she set the mug down, opened her laptop, and read the morning briefing her team had prepared. What was in the briefing stopped her on page 2. Warren Cole had arrived in Chicago the previous evening. His name appeared on the gala's confirmed attendee list, submitted 48 hours ago under a holding company name that her research team had traced back to Meridian in 4 steps. He had not been on the original list. He had added himself recently, which meant he had received information about something that made his personal presence at tonight's event strategically necessary. She read that 3 times, then she called Daniel. "He knows something is changing," she said, the moment he answered. "We think so, yes." The registration was submitted 18 hours after Patricia's meeting with Michael about the term sheet. The connection is, he has someone inside the company. It landed in her chest with the particular weight of a piece of information that explains several things at once. Someone told him Patricia is pushing back. Someone told him the deal is in danger. That's the most logical conclusion. Who? We're working on it. Our best current assessment is someone in the legal or finance function. Someone with access to internal communication about the Meridian negotiation. Emily set the coffee down. She thought fast. Cole at the gala was not a disaster in some ways. It accelerated a confrontation that was coming regardless. But Cole at the gala with intelligence about the deal's status changed the geometry of the evening. He was not going to be a passive attendee. He was going to be working the room, looking for leverage, looking for the thread he could pull to get the deal back on track. He was also going to be looking at her. The moment she walked in as Emily Sterling Reed, Cole would know. He had been watching Sterling Global for 20 years. He would recognize the name, and the moment he recognized the name, he would start recalculating everything, the protective structures around Carter's employees, the advisory contact with Patricia, all of it. He would trace it back, and the picture he assembled would be correct, and then he would have to decide what to do with it. She needed to get to Michael before Cole did. Daniel, she was already moving toward the closet. "I need to be at the gala early, before the main arrival window. I need to be inside before Cole gets there. The event opens at 6:30 for pre-reception. Can you get me in at 6? A pause. The Sterling family has a long-standing relationship with the gala's foundation. I can make a call." "Make it," she hung up. She stood in front of the dress Daniel had sent, deep navy, precisely cut, the kind of garment that had been made by people who understood that the right clothes in the right context do not decorate the person wearing them so much as confirm something that was already true. She thought about Michael, about where his head was this morning, the morning after Patricia had delivered the audit results, and he had sat with them and said, "I've been asking the wrong questions for a year." She thought about what it cost to say that, really say it, not as a deflection or a performance of humility, but as an honest accounting of something you had done wrong. She knew something about that particular cost. She thought about the version of him she was hoping still existed. She thought about what happened if it didn't. Then she got dressed. The pre-reception hall was nearly empty when Emily arrived at 6:04. 3 foundation board members near the front, a handful of event staff, the particular charged quiet of a room that is about to become full and knows it. She moved through it with the ease of someone who had attended 100 rooms exactly like this one, not this specific room, but this category of room, where the architecture was designed to make power feel like beauty, and beauty feel like power, and both feel like inevitability. She found the foundation director, a woman named Margaret Holt, who had known the Sterling family for 30 years, and whose expression when she saw Emily shift from professional welcome to something more complex and personal. Margaret took both her hands. "My God, look at you. Hello, Margaret. We didn't know you'd be, your grandmother didn't say." "My grandmother doesn't always say." Emily squeezed her hands. "Is there somewhere quiet I could wait for a few minutes before the main room fills?" Of course. Margaret led her to a small side room off the main hall, a room used for private foundation conversations, with 2 chairs and a side table and the specific quality of privacy that very expensive events provide for the people who need it most. "Can I get you anything?" "Just a few minutes." Margaret left. Emily sat. She checked her phone. Daniel had sent a message. Cole confirmed arrived downtown, expected at the venue 7:15 to 7:30. Michael Carter RSB confirmed, expected 7 to 7:15. She had at most an hour before Cole was in the room. She needed to find Michael in that hour, and what she needed to say to him, what she had been preparing to say, in various forms for weeks, was not something that could be rushed, but also could not be the slow, careful conversation she had originally imagined. The context had changed. Cole's presence changed it. She thought about how to begin. She had thought about this many times, in the quiet hours of Connecticut mornings and the long days of Chicago work, and she had never fully resolved it because there was no clean beginning available to her. Every possible entry point into the truth carried the weight of everything that had come before it. She could not walk up to Michael Carter and say hello without that hello containing 7 years of a marriage, a Tuesday morning with a pen, and 6 weeks of invisible protection she'd arranged for people he didn't know she was protecting. There was no clean beginning, there was only the true one. At 6:51, Michael Carter walked into the pre-reception hall. She knew the moment he arrived because she heard Margaret Holt's voice shift into the register it used for significant arrivals, a half-step warmer, a half-beat more animated. She heard Michael's response, his voice carrying the easy social fluency she had always admired and sometimes envied, the ability to make a room feel like he was glad to be specifically in it. She walked to the doorway of the side room. He was 20 feet away, his back partially to her, in conversation with Margaret. The charcoal suit. Different from the one he'd worn that Tuesday morning, this one was more formal. The occasion requiring it, but the same category of garment, the same category of man inside it. Composed, purpose, moving through the world with the confidence of someone who had decided who he was and how he fit. She watched him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked out of the side room. She did not announce herself. She did not stage the approach. She simply walked toward him through the quiet pre-reception hall and was 6 feet away when Margaret Holt's eyes found her and widened, and Michael, catching Margaret's expression, turned. The moment he turned was the moment she saw the sequence of recognition move across his face, and the sequence was more complicated than she had anticipated, because it was not clean surprise, not the single-note shock of seeing someone unexpected. It was layered recognition. First, Emily, here tonight. Then confusion, why is Emily here tonight? Then something else, something she hadn't predicted, something that moved through his eyes before he had time to manage it. It looked in the 2 seconds before he reassembled his expression, like relief. She filed that. She didn't know what to do with it yet, but she filed it. Emily, he said. Michael. Margaret Holt looked between them with the expression of someone who has just realized she is standing inside a scene that has nothing to do with the gala, and took a small, expert step backward. There are guests arriving, and she was gone. They stood facing each other in the near-empty hall. 6 feet of distance that contained, in compressed form, everything that had happened since a Tuesday morning in a kitchen. I didn't know you'd be here, he said. I know. You look, he stopped. Tried again. Things have been happening with the company that have made me think about some things. I know about those too. He went very still. You know about the audit? I know about a lot of things. Michael, she held his gaze. I need to talk to you. Not here, not like this, but tonight before this room fills up. There are things you need to hear, and I need to be the one to say them. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating, not in the cold way, not in the boardroom way, but the genuine human calculation of a person trying to figure out what a moment requires of them. Okay, he said, okay, tell me. Not the full version, not tonight. Not in the next 20 minutes, but the most urgent piece. She took a breath. The advisor who gave Patricia the information about Meridian. Sarah Ellis, his jaw tightened slightly. Patricia told me there was an advisor. She said she needed permission to share the name. I'm giving you the name now. Emily held his eyes. There is no Sarah Ellis. The information came from me. The stillness that fell over him was absolute. From you, he said. Yes, you've been. How long have you been? Approximately. She kept her voice even. I came back to Chicago 6 weeks ago. Not as myself. I learned what was happening with your company. I learned about Meridian. I learned what Meridian actually is and what they were actually planning to do with financial solutions. And I took steps to make sure the people inside your company had some protection regardless of how things went. He was staring at her. His face was doing something she had never seen it do in 7 years of marriage. It was completely unguarded. All the professional composure gone, just the man underneath looking at her with an expression she could only describe as the face of someone whose understanding of a situation is being rebuilt in real time. The employee benefit structures, he said slowly. The client contract guarantees. Patricia couldn't trace where those came from. No, that was you. Yes, he looked away for a moment. Looked at the floor, looked back at her. Why? It was such a simple question, and it deserved a simple answer, so she gave him one. Because 214 people had nothing to do with anything that happened between you and me, she said, and they shouldn't have to pay for it. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, watched him take the weight of it, and not put it down. Emily, his voice was different now. Queter, who are you? She had known this question was coming. She had been preparing for it for 6 weeks in the abstract, and for 7 years in every way that mattered. She had imagined many versions of this moment, some of them harder, some of them easier, none of them quite this quiet. "My name," she said, "is Emily Sterling Reed. My grandmother is Evelyn Sterling. I am the designated successor of Sterling Global Holdings." The silence lasted 4 full seconds. "Sterling Capital," he said, the name of the investment group that had been circling his sector. The name that had felt in recent months like a presence at the edge of his awareness. "Sterling Capital is part of the family holdings." Yes, the protective structures arranged through Sterling's private advisory arm. He put one hand on the back of a nearby chair. Not dramatically, just the instinctive steadying motion of a person whose balance has shifted under them. "You were never—" He stopped. The woman you married was exactly who she told you she was," as Emily said. And for the first time, something moved in her voice that was not composure, not strategy, not the 6 weeks of focused preparation, just the thing underneath all of that, which was still, despite everything, real. "I never lied to you about who I was. I hid what I carried. That's different. I came to Chicago because I wanted to know if someone could love me before they knew what I was worth. You did love me for a while." The last 3 words landed softly, but they landed. He looked at her, and whatever defense he'd been instinctively assembling, whatever version of justification or counter-argument or self-protection, she watched it fail to form. She watched him instead simply take it. "And then I stopped," he said. "Not a question. You stopped seeing me. That's not exactly the same thing, but it's close enough." He was quiet for a moment. And then he said something that surprised her completely. "I knew something was wrong with me," he said. "I knew I could feel that I was making choices that weren't what I actually believed in. The company, the decisions over the past year, the way I stopped listening to people who were trying to tell me the truth. I knew. And He stopped. I kept looking away from it. Yes. The morning with the papers," his voice dropped. "I told myself it was the right decision. I told myself you were holding me back." Shook his head. "I believed all of it. I needed to believe it, I know. You were never holding me back, no. I was holding myself back and putting your face on it." The hall was still nearly empty. Somewhere beyond the main doors, she could hear the growing sound of arrivals, the gala filling toward its 7:30 capacity. Voices and music beginning to find each other. They had minutes, not much more. She looked at him. "Michael, there is something else you need to know tonight. Something that changes the immediate situation." He refocused. The man who had been standing in his own reckoning stepped back into the situation. She could see him do it, could see the shift from the personal to the operational. And she was glad he still had that ability. She was going to need it. "Warren Cole is going to be in this room tonight," she said. "I don't know that name. I know you don't. He's Meridian's actual principal. His name doesn't appear in any of their public documentation. He is 73 years old, and he has done to 11 other companies what he is in the process of attempting with yours." She watched his face carefully. "He arrived in Chicago last night. He added himself to the gala list 48 hours after you declined the term sheet. He knows the deal is in trouble, which means someone inside Carter Financial Solutions told him." Michael's jaw set. "Someone inside?" "Yes. We don't know who yet. But Cole is coming tonight because he believes he can salvage the deal in person. He is going to approach you. He is going to be charming and reasonable, and he is going to have an answer for everything in that folder Patricia showed you. He is very good at this. What do I do? You don't engage with him on the terms he sets," Emily said. "You listen. You don't commit. And when he mentions Sterling, because he will mention Sterling, he'll know who I am the moment he sees me in this room, and he'll try to use it as leverage. You already know the truth. So he has nothing to leverage." Michael looked at her for a long moment. "He'll try to use you against me. He'll try to suggest that Sterling's involvement in your company's situation is hostile, that I've been positioning against you, that whatever protections were put in place around your employees were actually designed to—" She paused, "to give Sterling a claim on the company's assets. Is that true?" The question was direct, unguarded, the question of a man who had decided he was done looking away from things. "No," she said. "The structures were designed to protect your employees. They have no claim on company equity or assets. My attorney can provide the documentation tonight if you need it." He held her gaze. "I believe you," he said. And then, with the kind of us that saw something real, "I don't know if I've earned the right to say I trust you. But I believe you, that's enough," she said. "For tonight, that's enough." The main doors opened. The sound of the gala came through in 300 people and their conversations. A room full of performers warming their bests of themselves for an audience of their peers. Michael straightened. She straightened. They looked at each other for one moment more, in the quiet before the room took them. Emily. Something in his voice that she hadn't heard in years, the register from before the money came and changed things. Sorry, for the papers, for all of it. She looked at him. I know, she said. Let's get through tonight first. They walked into the room together, and the room received them the way rooms receive people who carry something significant with a slight, collective, almost imperceptible attention, the social organism registering without fully processing that something worth watching had just arrived. 7:22. Emily felt the quality of the room shift. She was in conversation with the CEO of a mid-sized Chicago investment firm, who was telling her something about municipal bond markets that she was genuinely listening to when she felt, rather than saw, the arrival of Warren Cole. It was not a dramatic entrance. He was not the type for dramatic entrances. He entered the way he did everything: quietly, efficiently, with the specific self-containment of someone who never uses more presence than the situation requires. But she felt it. She excused herself from the bond market conversation with a word and a smile and turned. Cole was 60 feet away, working his way through the room with the practiced ease of a man who had been in hundreds of rooms exactly like this one. He was shorter than she'd expected. She had built him in her imagination from his history, which was large, and his physical presence was something else entirely. Compact, unremarkable, the kind of man you passed at 100 business events without registering. He had white hair and a dark suit, and the particular expression of someone who is simultaneously having the conversation they're in and the calculation they're not showing. His eyes found her. She knew the exact moment, the small pause in his social movement. Barely visible, the fraction of a second that a less careful observer would miss. He found her face, identified it, and understood. She watched him absorb it. Watched the calculation shift in real time. Watched him look away, continue his conversation, and begin the process of reconfiguring his approach to the evening. He was good. He was very good. She was better. At 7:34, Daniel appeared at her elbow, physically present, which she had not expected. He had driven from Connecticut, she realized. Of course he had. He had been at her grandmother's side for 31 years and at Emily's side for everything consequential since she was 9 years old, and there was no version of this night where he wasn't going to be in the room. Cole is going for Carter, Daniel said quietly, close to her ear. He angled toward him 3 minutes after he identified you. I know. Where's Michael? East end of the room. He's seen Cole moving toward him and he's holding. Not engaging, not retreating. Something moved in her chest. Holding. She had asked him to hold and he was holding. I need to get there before Cole closes the distance, she said. You have about 90 seconds. She moved. She moved through the room the way she had been taught. To move through rooms with the particular efficiency that is invisible, because it looks like ease, not urgency. She smiled at 2 people who registered her passage, exchanged a word with a third, and arrived at Michael's side at the same moment that Warren Cole arrived from the opposite direction. The 3 of them formed a triangle. Cole looked at Emily with the expression of a man making a series of very fast decisions. He extended his hand to Michael. Michael Carter, Warren Cole. I've been looking forward to meeting you. His voice was exactly what she had expected, warm, unhurried, the voice of a man who had trained it over decades to convey the specific frequency of trustworthiness. Michael shook the hand. Mr. Cole. Cole's eyes moved to Emily. The smallest acknowledgement. And this is Emily Reed, Michael said. Then, with a pause so precise it could not have been accidental, my wife. Cole absorbed this without a visible reaction, which impressed her even as it confirmed what she already knew about him. I wasn't aware Mr. Carter was married, Cole said pleasantly. To Emily. People aren't always aware of the things that matter most, Emily said. Her voice was entirely warm. It's one of the most common mistakes in any field. Something moved behind Cole's eyes. Michael spoke before Cole could respond. Mr. Cole, I've had a chance to review some background on Meridional Capital's previous partnerships. I'd like to ask you directly about a firm called Halcyon Technologies. They were a Meridian partner in 2019. Cole did not hesitate. Halcyon had a challenging market period. Their founder was managed out 18 months after Meridian's investment, Michael said. 3 senior executives left within the same 6-month window. The company now operates as a subsidiary of a Meridian holding entity. He looked at Cole with the particular, steady gaze of a man who has decided he is done looking away. Is that the partnership structure you were proposing for Carter Financial Solutions? The silence lasted 2 seconds. I think there may have been some mischaracterization of Meridian's involvement. Cole began. I have the board meeting minutes from Halcyon's final 18 months, Emily said. Quietly, pleasantly, would you like to discuss them here? Or would you prefer a different venue? Cole looked at her. For the first time all evening, something in his expression was not fully managed. Sterling Global, he said. Yes, Emily said. Your grandmother, he said, and something moved in his voice, not quite respect, not quite grudging acknowledgement, but something adjacent to both. I wondered when she'd send someone. She didn't send me, Emily said. I came on my own for my own reason. She held his gaze. I think you understand the difference. Cole stood in the triangle they had made, the three of them, in the middle of 300 people, the gala conversation flowing around them like water around a stone, and he looked at Emily, and he looked at Michael, and he read the geometry of the situation was the man who had spent 50 years in exactly these kinds of moments. He smiled. It was a genuine smile, which was perhaps the most unsettling thing about it. Another time then, he said to Michael, the offer stands, if circumstances change. He nodded to Emily, a slight, specific nod that carried in it 20 years of a history. She had read in 60 pages of archived documents, but that he had lived. Then he turned and moved back into the room. Michael watched him go. He'll try again, yes, but not through Meridian, and not through the same mechanism. You've removed the vulnerability he was exploiting. She paused. As long as you're willing to do what comes next. Michael turned to look at her. What comes next? Fixing the actual problems, the infrastructure gap, the 31 clients who were oversold, James Wu's escalations. Rosa Delgado's client, she looked at him steadily. All of it not managed, fixed. He held her gaze for a long moment. I know, he said. I know. He exhaled slowly. Patricia told me about James Wu's email. 4 escalations. He shook his head. I never saw them. Your chief of staff filtered them. His expression shifted. That's yes, I suspected that tonight when I was thinking through how information has been getting to me. A pause. How did you know? Because I read them. James sent them. They existed. You never responded to them. The logical explanation for that gap is that someone in the middle stopped them. Michael was quiet for a moment. I've been building a structure around me that tells me what I want to hear. I can see that now. I couldn't see it from inside it. Most people can't. How'd he stop? How do you see it from outside something when you're the one inside it? It was the kind of question that had no easy answer, and she respected him too much to give it an easy one. You build the discipline of asking the uncomfortable questions before someone forces them on you, she said. You deliberately seek out the people who will tell you something is wrong before it becomes a crisis. You treat the people who escalate concerns as the most valuable people in the room, not the most inconvenient. A pause. You stop mistaking comfort for truth. He looked at her for a long time. I made that mistake with you, he said quietly, didn't I? I stopped letting you tell me the uncomfortable things. I made it too costly for you to say them. She did not answer immediately. She gave the truth the space it deserved. Yes, she said. You did. He looked away, looked back. I'm sorry. I know I said it before, but I want to say it here. In this room where everything is, I'm sorry, Emily. For all of it. For the pen. For not seeing. Stopped. For not seeing. The gala moved around them. 300 people and their conversations and their performances of success, none of them knowing that in the middle of the room, a man was saying the truest thing he had said in years, and a woman was deciding what to do with it. I know, she said. What do we? He stopped himself, looked at her carefully. That's not, I don't have the right to ask what we do. I know that. I just want to know what you need, what I can do. She looked at him. Start with James Wu, she said. Call him Monday morning. Tell him you read his escalations. Tell him he was right and you should have listened, and ask him to walk you through the solution he's already been building. Michael blinked. He's already building a solution. He never stopped. Even when no one was listening, she held his gaze. That's the kind of person who works for you, Michael. That's what you almost signed away to Warren Cole. He absorbed that. She watched it land, watched the full weight of it arrive in a way that spreadsheets and audit results couldn't quite deliver. Because it was not abstract, it was a specific person doing a specific thing in a specific act of belief that had not been rewarded. Monday morning, he said. First call. Good. It's 9/7. As the gala moved toward its close, Daniel found her again. Cole left 20 minutes ago, he said. His car went to O'Hare. He's done here. For now, for long enough. She scanned the room. We still don't know who his contact inside the company is. We have it narrowed to 3 people in the legal function. I'll have a name by Monday. Give it to Patricia. Not to Michael directly. Let Patricia handle it. Michael needs to be rebuilding trust with his team right now, not investigating it. Daniel looked at her with the expression he'd been wearing periodically all evening, the one that meant he was comparing the person of him to the child he'd known, and finding the comparison worth making. "Your grandmother," he said, "is going to be very pleased." "My grandmother," Emily said, "is going to say I should have moved 3 days earlier." "Probably," he almost smiled. "She also said something else before I left this morning." Emily looked at him. She said, "Tell Emily that whatever she decides about the personal situation, I mean with Miss Carter, she should know that the test she came to Chicago to run produced a result. It just took longer than the original timeline." He paused. "I think she means he passed." Emily looked across the room to where Michael was standing in conversation with two people they didn't recognize. Not the charcoal-suited, composed executive of the Tuesday Morning. Not entirely, but not gone from that person either. Someone in between. Someone at the beginning of a harder and more honest version of himself. "Tell her," Emily said quietly, "that the test produced a result, and that I'm still evaluating what to do with it." Daniel nodded. She stood for a moment longer, watching the room, watching the 300 people who were performing success at each other with varying degrees of sincerity, watching Michael listen to someone across the room with what looked, from here, like genuine attention. She thought about what her grandmother had said. The test produced a result: 7 years, a signed divorce paper, 6 weeks of invisible work, 1 conversation in a near-empty hall, 1 confrontation in the middle of a gala, and at the end of all of it, the thing she had come to Chicago 7 years ago to find out remained genuinely, complexly, incompletely answered. Whether someone could love her for who she was. Not yet, not fully. Not with 7 years of marriage and a Tuesday morning between them and everything that had to be rebuilt before anything else could be. But the beginning of an honest answer was more than she'd expected to find tonight. She picked up her coat and found Daniel and said goodnight to Margaret Holt and walked out of the gala and into Chicago's cold December air. Michael watched her go. Michael Carter made the call to James Wu at 8:47 Monday morning. Not at 9, not after his first 2 meetings. At 8:47, before his assistant arrived, before the day built its usual architecture of demands around him, before anything else could convince him that there was something more important than the first promise he had made to himself on the drive home from the gala Friday night. James answered on the 3rd ring with the slightly cautious hello of someone who does not recognize the number and has learned, in a company experiencing internal turbulence, to be careful about what they walk into unguarded. "James, it's Michael Carter." A silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds and contained, in those 2 seconds, 4 escalation emails over 8 months, and every careful, professional, unrewarded act of a person who had kept believing in something past the point where belief had been reciprocated. "Mr. Carter," James said, "I read your emails." Michael did not preface it, did not soften it with context or qualifications. He had decided on Friday night that the only way to begin was with the direct statement of the thing, and he was holding to that. "All 4 of them, I read them Saturday morning. I want you to know I understand what you were telling me, and I want you to know you were right, and I should have responded to the first one." Another silence. Different quality, the silence of someone recalibrating, trying to figure out if they are inside the conversation they think they're inside. "I appreciate that," James said carefully. "I'm not calling to apologize and move on," Michael said. "I'm calling because Patricia told me you've been building a solution, on your own time with inadequate resources while waiting for someone to listen." He paused. "I'm listening now. Tell me everything." What James Wu told him over the next 53 minutes was the most useful conversation Michael Carter had in the year. Not because the information was new, much of it existed in the 4 emails he hadn't seen, but because hearing it spoken, hearing the specificity and the patience and the accumulated knowledge of a person who had refused to give up on a problem, while the institution around him refused to take it seriously, broke something open in Michael that the audit results and Patricia's careful presentations had cracked but not fully opened. James walked him through the infrastructure gap with the precision of someone who had been living inside the problem long enough to know every corner of it. He described the point of failure, the timeline to critical exposure, and this was the part that landed hardest: the solution he'd already designed, tested in a limited sandbox environment, and was ready to implement the moment he had the resources and the authorization to move. He'd been ready for 3 months. He'd been ready since the second email, when he'd already anticipated that simply identifying the problem wasn't going to be enough, and had kept building anyway. "What do you need?" Michael asked, when James finished. "Engineering headcount 3 senior, 2 mid-level. Infrastructure budget that reflects the actual scope of the problem, not the scope someone was comfortable acknowledging. And James paused, and in the pause was the particular hesitation of someone about to say the honest thing and not being certain it will be received. Decision-making authority on the implementation. I need to be able to move when the timing is right without waiting for 3 levels of approval. You have it, Michael said. All of it today. The silence this time was longer. Mr. Carter James's voice was different now, careful in a new way. Not the careful of someone protecting themselves, but the careful of someone handling something they hadn't expected to be handling. Is this a different conversation than the ones we've been having? Yes, Michael said. It's a completely different conversation. I am a different conversation. He stopped. That's not what I mean is, I've been wrong about how I've been running this company, and I'm not going to keep being wrong about it. That starts today. It starts with this call. James Wu did not respond immediately. Michael let the silence stand. He had learned in the last 72 hours that there were silences that deserved to be filled and silences that deserved to be respected, and he was getting better at knowing the difference. Okay, James said finally, then let's talk about the implementation timeline. They talked for another 40 minutes. When Michael hung up, his assistant had arrived. His calendar was full, and 3 people were waiting for his attention on matters that had seemed urgent an hour ago, and now seemed like exactly what they were, the ordinary operations of a company that was still, despite everything, capable of being what it had set out to be, if the person running it decided to run it that way. He told his assistant to hold everything for 20 more minutes. Then he sat at his desk and wrote an email to Rosa Delgado, the client success manager, whose client's renewal was coming in 6 weeks, telling her that he had read the notes. He understood the situation, and he wanted to meet with her and the client personally to make it right. He sent it before he could reconsider the instinct that had produced it. Then he picked up the phone and called Patricia Lang. I need a name, he said, when she answered. Daniel Brooks told the person he worked with that they'd have the identity of Cole's Connex side to the company by Monday. I assume that contact was passed to you, a beat. It was, tell me, Patricia told him. He listened. He did not react in the way the information initially him to react, with anger, with the instinct to confront immediately and publicly. He sat with it for a moment and thought about what would actually serve the company and the people in it, as opposed to what would serve the version of him that was still, somewhere underneath the new decisions, capable of confusing action with wisdom. Handle it through HR and legal, he said quietly. By the book, no drama. That's the right call. And Patricia, he paused. I owe you a conversation. A real one. Not about the company, about the past 14 months and the ways I made it harder for you to do your job. I'd like to have that conversation when you're ready for it. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Friday, she said, end of day, buy me a coffee, done. He hung up. He let his assistant send in the first waiting meeting. The day began. It would be inaccurate to say that what followed was easy. Because it wasn't. The weeks after the gala were the hardest work Michael Carter had done in his career, not because the problems were technically insurmountable, but because solving them required him to consistently choose the harder, more honest, more vulnerable approach over the faster, more comfortable one, and to make that choice every day in conditions where the comfortable choice was always available and always wrong. James Wu's infrastructure solution went into implementation in the second week of January and performed, within the first month, almost exactly as James had projected, which was to say it worked. It worked in the specific, undramatic way that real solutions work when they've been properly designed by someone who actually understood the problem, not a rescue, not a dramatic turnaround moment, but a steady, measurable improvement in system reliability that the clients noticed first and the internal metrics confirmed second. Michael told the company in an all-hands meeting in the third week of January the truth about what had gone wrong over the past 18 months, not a softened version, not a narrative reframe, not that we encountered some challenges, and emerged strong language that press releases are built from. He told them what had actually happened, that the company had oversold its capabilities, that internal concerns had not been heard at the level they needed to be heard, that decisions had been made that prioritized growth metrics over the foundation that growth were supposed to rest on, and that this was going to change not because of a new strategy or a new initiative, but because of a different way of running the place. He mentioned James Wu by name. He mentioned Rosa Delgado by name. He mentioned 4 other people who had raised concerns that hadn't been acted on and told the company that these people had been right and he had not listened, and that was on him. The all-hands meeting lasted 2 hours and 12 minutes and had more genuine back and forth than any company meeting in the previous 8 months. Afterward, an employee named Carla Reyes, 8 months at Carter Financial Solutions, no particular reason to believe she had the CEO's attention, came up to Michael and said, "I've been telling my husband for 3 months that this place might not be what I thought it was when I joined. I think I'm going to tell him something different tonight." Then she walked back to her desk. Michael stood in the middle of the cleared meeting room for a moment after she left. He thought about what Emily had said. That's what you almost signed away to Warren Cole. He thought about Carla Reyes going home and telling her husband something different. He thought about the employee handbook he'd written 6 years ago, in a different version of himself, and how the version of himself he was trying to become again was not that early version, younger, less tested, less aware of the ways good intentions corrode under sustained pressure, but something that had those instincts and also knew now what they cost to maintain. He sat down and answered 17 emails and then went home. It was the first time in 8 months he'd gone home before 8. Emily knew about the all-hands meeting because Patricia had called her. She was in New York by then, properly in New York, in the Sterling offices on the 42nd floor that she had been occupying with increasing ease and decreasing self-consciousness as the weeks passed, and the role that had always been theoretically hers became practically, daily, undeniably hers. Her grandmother came in 3 days a week, increasingly as an advisor rather than an operator, which was the transition they had both understood was coming, and which landed, when it actually arrived, with more emotion than either of them had anticipated. He told the whole company the truth, Patricia said. On the phone he named James Wu, he named Rosa. He named people who had been ignored and said publicly that they'd been wrong. Emily sat with that. How did the room receive it? She asked quietly. At first, then, Patricia paused, and Emily could hear the complicated warmth in her voice, the warmth of a person who has been fighting for something for a long time and is now watching it happen. Then, very differently from quiet, after she hung up, Emily sat for a while in her office with the city 42 floors below her, and the particular quality of January light on New York, which is cold and clear and uncompromising in the way that winter light in the Northeast is uncompromising, not cruel. Just honest. She thought about Michael standing in front of 214 people and telling the truth. She thought about what that cost. She knew from her own life exactly what that cost. She thought about the question she had been carrying since she walked out of the gala into Chicago's December air. What to do with the beginning of an honest answer. She did not have a resolution yet. She had been deliberate about not rushing toward one, because rushing toward an emotional resolution before the practical situation was stable was the kind of choice she had learned, in years of watching her grandmother navigate difficult situations. To resist the feelings were real. That did not mean they were ready to be acted on. But they were real. 3 weeks into January, she received a letter. Not an a physical letter, handwritten, sent to the Sterling offices in New York in an envelope addressed to Emily Sterling Reed in handwriting she recognized, slightly left-leaning, the particular H that she had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards for 7 years. She opened it at her desk. She read it twice. It was 4 pages, handwritten on plain paper, and it did not ask her for anything. It did not propose anything. It did not make an argument for any particular outcome or direction. What it did, what it spent 4 handwritten pages doing, in the handwriting she recognized, in the voice she had loved, was tell the truth. About what he had seen in her and failed to value. About what he had built with his company and the choices that had corrupted it. About the man he had been at the gallery opening, and the man he had become in the years between, and the man he was trying to become now, who was not either of those but something harder, and more informed and more genuinely committed to the things he claimed to believe in. He wrote about the employee handbook. He said he had found a copy in his desk drawer the previous week, the original printed version from 6 years ago, and had read it start to finish for the first time in years. He wrote, "I believed every word of this when I wrote it. I stopped living by it. I am trying to understand the distance between those two things." On the 4th page, the last paragraph, he wrote, "You told me the night of the gala to start with James Wu. I did, and you were right the way you were right about things I didn't listen to for years. I'm not writing to ask you to come back. I'm writing because you deserve to know that what you did, all of it, the structures, the risk, the honesty, it mattered. The company is better, the people in it are better. I am trying to be better. Whatever you decide about any of it, you should know that it mattered." She read the last paragraph 3 times. Then she set the letter down, looked at the New York skyline, and sat with it. She brought the letter to her grandmother that evening. Evelyn read it without comment, her expression doing nothing dramatic, the expression of a woman who has read a great many important documents in her life and knows how to give each one its appropriate weight without exceeding it. When she finished, she set it on the table between them. "Well," she said. "Yes," Emily said. "He wrote it by hand, I noticed. A man who writes something by hand in this era," Evelyn said, "is a man who wanted you to understand that he was willing to be slow about it." She looked at Emily. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, that's honest. I'm trying to be." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Outside the Connecticut estate, January had settled over everything with its characteristic lack of interest in anyone's feelings about the matter. The fire was going, the tea was hot, the room was exactly what it had always been. "He is not the man who handed you the pen," Evelyn said finally. "No, he's not. He is also not the man from the gallery opening." "No," Emily looked at the fire. "He's someone in between. Someone who knows what the man from the gallery opening actually cost to be. Now, she paused. Someone who has looked at the distance between who he said he was and who he was actually being and is trying to close it." She looked at her grandmother. "I know what that costs. I've done it myself." Evelyn looked at her with those winter-light eyes. "You came to Chicago," she said, "to find out if someone could love you before they knew what you were worth." "Yes." And Emily was quiet for a long time. "He loved me before he knew," she said, "and then he stopped seeing me. And then I don't know what then is yet. I know what the letter is. I know it's real. I know," she stopped. "I know that what I feel is real. I've never been confused about that part." "Then what are you waiting for?" Emily looked at her grandmother, this woman who had built an empire and been married for 41 years, to a man she had loved honestly and lost 11 years ago to a heart that finally stopped, and who had never in Emily's memory confused patience with avoidance or caution with fear. "I'm waiting," Emily said slowly, "for the moment when what I feel and what makes sense and what he has actually become are all pointing in the same direction at the same time. And are they?" She thought about James Wu. She thought about Carla Reyes going home to tell her husband something different. She thought about 4 handwritten pages sent to the Sterling offices in New York by a man who understood that email was faster and chose not to use it. "Getting there," she said. She called him the next morning. Not a letter, not a carefully managed in-person meeting. She picked up the phone at 7:45, before her day built itself into something too structured to allow for the unstructured thing, and she called him. He answered before the second ring. "Emily, I got your letter. I know. I wasn't sure. I didn't know if the office would forward it. They knew to. A beat. I wasn't sure what I was asking for when I wrote it. I needed you to know." "I know," she said. "That came through. Patricia told me about the all-hands meeting," she continued. "And about James Wu and about Carla Reyes." He was quiet for a moment. "She told you about Carla Reyes?" "She did." Another pause. "I think about that a lot, what that employee said. I think about all the Carla Reyeses. The people who showed up every day and trusted that the person running the place was running it the way they deserved." "That's the right thing to think about," Emily said. "Keep thinking about it." "I will." A pause. "Emily, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that there is no pressure attached to the asking. You can say no, you can say not now, you can say I need more time. All of those answers are..." He stopped. "All of those are answers I will respect completely." She waited. "Can I take you to dinner?" he said. "Not a conversation about the company or about Meridian or about any of it. Just dinner. The way we used to before I stopped knowing how to just be present with you without half my attention somewhere else." She sat with the question. She thought about everything it would mean to say yes. Not the surface of it, the dinner itself, the conversation, but what it would mean underneath, what door it opened, what it required of both of them to walk through honestly. She thought about the test she had come to Chicago to run, the one that had taken 7 years and ended with a pen in her palm and a Tuesday morning and a 12-minute allowance of grief, and then 6 weeks of invisible work, and then a gala, and then 4 handwritten pages, and then this phone call at 7:45 in the morning. She thought about what her grandmother had said. The test produced a result. "Yes," she said, "dinner." The sound he made was not dramatic. It was not the sound of triumph or relief. It was something quieter than either. Something that had the texture of a person setting down a weight they have been carrying carefully and for a long time. "Thank you," he said. When are you in New York?" "For the next 2 weeks. After that I'll be in Chicago for a week." "Chicago," he said. "My city," or he paused. "I realize now you've always had more claim to it than I did. It's a big city," she said. "It can belong to both of us." He almost laughed. She heard it, the shape of a laugh, the beginning of it, and then the decision to let it come, and then it came. Genuine and low, and the laugh she remembered from the gallery opening, from the years before the money changed what real meant to him. Chicago then, he said, 2 weeks. She hung up. She sat for a moment in the morning quiet of the Sterling offices, hers now, properly hers, the way the role was hers, the way the name was hers, the way the work was hers, and she breathed. Daniel knocked and came in at 8:15 with the morning briefing and 2 coffees, because he had worked for this family for 31 years, and he knew that some mornings required coffee before the briefing. He looked at her face, he set both coffees down, he did not ask. Chicago in 2 weeks, she said. He sat across from her. As Emily Sterling Reed. He nodded slowly. Your grandmother will want to know, I'll tell her tonight. She'll say she expected it, she'll be right. Emily picked up the coffee. She usually is. Daniel allowed himself a full smile, the real one, the one he generally kept reserved for occasions that genuinely warranted it. The briefing, he said, Singapore first, then London, then the Chicago sector update. The Chicago sector update, she said. Tell me, he told her, Carter Financial Solutions Q4 numbers, the preliminary ones showed the first genuine margin recovery in 6 quarters. James Wu's infrastructure implementation had reduced client support escalations by 31% in the first 3 weeks. Rosa Delgado's client had renewed a full annual contract, one of the largest the company had after the personal meeting Michael had requested. She listened to all of it. She listened the way she'd always listened, completely, without the part of her attention that used to wonder, in the middle of everything, whether any of it meant anything beyond itself. It meant something. She had stopped needing to wonder. What happened in the weeks and months after that phone call was not a fairy tale, and neither of them wanted it to be. It was something harder and more honest than a fairy tale, the specific, daily, imperfect, unglamorous work of 2 people who had hurt each other and been hurt, who had both carried costs and both made errors, and both arrived at this particular moment, having been genuinely changed by the distance they had traveled to get here. The dinner in Chicago was not perfect. There were moments of awkwardness and silences that required more effort than they would have in the easy early years. And at one point, Michael said something about the company that was slightly defensive in the old way and caught himself and started the sentence over. And Emily noticed him catching himself, and noticing that specific moment of watching him choose the harder thing was worth more to her than 100 perfect sentences. They walked afterward in the cold in the city that belonged to both of them. They did not decide anything that night. They did not put a label on anything or make a plan or arrive at a conclusion. They simply walked in Chicago in the cold and talked not about the company, not about Sterling, not about the past 18 months of everything, but about small things. Real things. The things that 2 people talk about when they are finding out whether they still have access to each other. They did. It was not the access they had in the beginning, when everything was new and easy and unearned. It was something different, harder one, more specific, more honest about what it had cost to be standing here at all. But it was real, it was mutual, and it was, Emily thought, walking in the cold air of a city she loved enough to build from. In March, Evelyn Sterling attended the quarterly Global Holdings Board meeting for the last time, in an operating capacity, and introduced Emily to the full board as the new chief executive of the firm she had spent 60 years building. The introduction was short. Evelyn was not a person who believed in long speeches, and what she said was this: My granddaughter understands that power is not what you accumulate. It is what you do with what other people have cost you. She has proven this. The company is in the right hands. Emily stood at the head of in front of 23 board members and felt the weight of it, not the crushing weight of something too heavy to carry, but the substantial weight of something real, something that required you to be genuinely equal to it and nothing less. She was equal to it. She had always been equal to it. The 7 years in Chicago, the Tuesday morning, the 12 minutes of grief, the 6 weeks of invisible work, all of it had not made her equal to it. She had been equal to it before any of that. But those things had made her certain of it, in the specific, unshakable way that only experience can make you certain. She gave the board a 30-minute presentation on the company's strategic direction for the next 5 years. She answered questions for 40 minutes after that. She did not need notes. When the meeting ended and the board filed out, Evelyn remained seated at the far end of the table. The 2 of them were alone in the room. Well, Emily said, your grandfather, Evelyn said, used to say that the measure of a good leader is what they do with a room full of people who are watching to see if they're real. What did the room think? Evelyn looked at her granddaughter, the woman she had spent 40 years deliberately building, Not by shaping her into something, but by creating the conditions under which she could become whatever she actually was. "I think," Evelyn said, "that the room thought you were real." Emily sat across from her grandmother in the quiet of the Sterling boardroom and felt something complete itself not end. Because this was not an ending, but complete the way a structure completes when the last piece goes in and the thing becomes what it was always being built toward. In April, Michael Carter's company was accepted into a Chicago Small Business Innovation Partnership that had historically been reserved for firms with 20 years of operating history. The exception was made, the committee's letter said, because of the company's demonstrated commitment to client success and its unusual transparency about its own operational challenges and the steps taken to address them. Patricia Lang framed the letter and put it on the wall outside her office, in the spot that had previously been occupied by the Q3 numbers she'd been trying to get Michael to look at honestly for 6 months. James Wu implemented the final phase of his infrastructure solution in the second week of April, 3 months ahead of the timeline he'd originally projected when Michael had given him the resources and the authorization to actually move. He sent Michael a 2-line email, "Final implementation complete." "Everything works." Michael forwarded it to Emily with no additional text. She read it and smiled. She thought about James Wu building the solution through 3 months of silence, 4 ignored emails, and the particular staining faith of a person who has decided that the work is worth doing, regardless of whether anyone is watching. She thought about what that was worth. She thought about the kind of person who did that and what it meant that there were people like that in the world, people who kept building towards something good in conditions that didn't reward them for it. She thought about her grandmother, 60 years of building. She thought about Daniel Brooks, 31 years of showing up. She thought about Patricia Lang, 14 months of fighting from inside a structure that kept resisting the fight. She thought about the Tuesday morning and the pen and the 12 minutes and everything that had followed. She thought, this is what it costs, and this is what it builds. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Michael. James's email made my morning. His response came back in under a minute. "Mine too. He's something else." She typed, "He is. You almost didn't know it." A longer pause this time. "Then I know. I won't forget that." She put the phone down. She looked at the city from the 42nd floor, New York today, Chicago in 6 days, Connecticut on the weekend, the world moving at the pace it moved when you were finally the person you had been becoming your entire life. She thought about a woman who had chosen 7 years of being unseen because she wanted to know if being seen was possible. She thought about the answer. It was not the clean, simple answer she had wanted at 26, standing at the beginning of her ordinary life. It was more complicated than that, and more expensive, and more genuinely earned. It was the answer you get when you stop waiting for the question to be easy and decide to live inside the real version of it, with all its cost and all its possibility and all its unguaranteed, hard-won, absolutely real hope. The woman who had signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning with a steady hand and said, "Understand what you lost when it's too late," had not been making a threat. She had been telling the truth. And the man who had handed her the pen finally understood it not, because she had punished him into understanding, not because she had wielded her power as a weapon, but because she had used everything she carried, everything she was, everything she had been built to be, to hold open the possibility of his becoming better than he had been. That was what she had come to Chicago to find out, not whether she could be loved by a man who knew her name. Whether she could be the kind of person who could hold the door open, even for someone who had, once let it close in her face. She was that person. She had always been that person, and now at last this whole world knew it.